Tallahassee at an event called Word of the South, in which I would do some literary readings, and then he already had music that related to that. So that's what we're going to do for you tonight. I'm going to read for about 5 minutes, and he's going to play a song for us, and then when you're tired of me, he and Kay will just continue to keep playing music for us. So welcome everybody who has come in this evening, who weren't here earlier. We're really glad to have you here. Oh, I guess I should say I'm Leslie Poole. I'm on the trustees board here, and I'm really happy to be here to talk to you tonight. So, all right, you ready? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to begin, first of all, by talking about the St. John's River. And Paul's song, Sacred Ground, will follow this. A little history of the St. John's River. It flows north from east central Florida, traveling slowly for 310 miles all the way to Jacksonville, only dropping 27 feet along the way. It's the longest river in the state. It was the first highway really through the center of Florida, bringing explorers, travelers, and writers, and people simply curious about what Florida was at the time, which was really a wilderness to everyone as well, long before railroads and highways brought people in another way. But thousands of years before this, it was a sacred place to native people, a source of sustenance, commerce, and travel. These indigenous groups came to the area after the last ice age, finding a bounty in the river that allowed them to become less nomadic. They had complex cultures. They created ceremonial sites, mounds for temples and burials, plazas and playing fields, and they shared the river briefly with such ancient creatures as the mastodon, bison, and saber-toothed cat. Imagine that. One group, Timucua, relied on the St. John's during the era of European exploration, and their lives were recorded by artists and writers who observed their rituals and games. The Mayaca people left behind a 10-foot wooden totem of an owl, accompanied by effigies of a pelican and otter. The Seminoles, who moved into the river valley centuries later, named the river Huilaca, meaning river of lakes, or big water. They built their villages on its banks and relied on it for trade and food. It was a sacred place, and river travelers since then have found similar notions. William Bartram, in his mostly solitary journey from 1773 to 74, conducted botany expeditions, camped on its banks, fished in its waters, hunkered down during thunderstorms that he described as hurricanes, and observed a wealth of wildlife, including alligators that tried to capsize his small wooden boat and take his fish. Bartram still was fascinated by the many springs that fed the river, a delight to his sensibilities, and described them beautifully. At Salt Springs on the western shore, Bartram wrote, "Behold, a vast circular expanse before you, the waters of which are so extremely clear as to be absolutely diaphanous or transparent as the ether. At the same time, innumerable bands of fish are seen, some clothed in the most brilliant colors. The voracious alligator stretched along at full length as the great trunk of a tree in size. The devouring garfish, inimical bass, and all the varieties of gilded painted brown. The barbed catfish, the dreaded stingray, skate and flounder, spotted bass. There are no signs of enmity, no attempt to devour each other. The different bands seem peaceably and complacently to move a little aside, as if it were to make room for others to pass by." Such wishful romantic thinking. They compared it to an excellent painting and noted that it seemed you could touch a fish's eye, when in reality it was 20 or 30 feet underwater. Bartram's writings delighted British readers, including poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who used Bartram's description of Florida's crystalline springs as an inspiration for passages from Kubla Khan. And in it he wrote, "Where out the sacred river ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea." Other travelers also found spirituality while traveling on the St. John's. For author Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, a 1933 trip on the river during a difficult time in her life was the tonic that restored her faith in humans and in herself. After getting lost in the upper river's confusing channels, Rawlings and her friend Dessie Smith, traveling in a small wooden boat, found their way. Following a week of smoother river travels and adventures, they returned home, and Rawlings wrote that she now was able to see, quote, "Beauty is pervasive and feels like perfume more than the object that contains it. Because I had known intimately a river, the earth pulsed under me." For author Bill Belleville, the St. John's was a place to explore, to celebrate. He wrote that it was, quote, "a river of infinite potential, a place to indulge myths, to evoke shards of timeless magic, to search for the natural realities that are sublime instead of merely virtual and safe. After all, this is a river where dreams have been chased through the early morning mist for centuries on the peninsula. If we are lucky, we may yet find enough wildness left here to take the shrillness of civilization out of us. May your river trek, perhaps on the boat tomorrow, at the conference help you find this peace, beauty, and adventure that previous travelers have found.
Thanks, Leslie. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our town. I wrote this song called Sacred Ground after spending a day at Stetson Kennedy's place up at Tallahassee in Jacksonville, listening to a few people perform, and I had promoted a concert series there for 10 years and spent a lot of time and was on the board of directors of the Stetson Kennedy Foundation. And for me, that was sacred ground, and there are a number of other places around the country for me that have become sacred ground. And certainly the St. Johns River is sacred space for me. And I was blessed to be able to play the song at author Bill Belleville's memorial service. It's called Sacred Ground.
In the hills of Carolina, walk through her woods and her streams, climb to the top of Grandfather Mountain, heard the lone eagle scream. So I stopped, took a good look around, knew that I was standing on sacred ground. Mighty slopes, I prayed among the giants of warriors, seeking a morsel of hope. So I stopped, took a good look around, knew that I was kneeling on sacred ground. Stood on the red rocks outside of Denver, watched the Rockies burst to snow, tried to drive the peaks late September, but there was no way to go. So I stopped, took a good look around, knew that I was stranded on sacred ground. See the shaking of the aspens, I can hear the weeping of the oaks, voices of my brothers and my sisters, who I never will let go. stood in the shadows of the St. John's River, felt your black water pass. I've been baptized in the Ottawa. Can't we free her at last? So I stopped, took a good look around, knew that I was standing in sacred ground. Paddled into the springs with no names, dove deep in blue and green. Made my peace among the gators and cypress and days. Just feels like a dream, so I stopped, took a good look around, knew that I was floating above sacred ground. The shaking of the hammers, I can hear the clearing of our land. Listen now, my brothers and my sisters, it's time to take a stand. So stop, take a good look around, know that you are standing on sacred ground. Please just stop, take a good look around, know that you are sitting on sacred ground.
In 1867, 2 years after the Civil War that some thought she helped start because of her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe, then 55, arrived in Florida looking for an escape from cold northern winters that she endured in Hartford, Connecticut. They were winters that were not good for the health of her husband, Calvin, so they became part of what we might say true snowbirds, spending their winters in Mandarin, just south of Jacksonville, on a house on a bluff over the St. Johns River. The house became a tourist attraction, as some northern visitors would land at the wharf, roam around her property, pick flowers, and peer into the house through the windows and doors, her son recorded. Florida was the scene of new adventures for Stowe. Already internationally renowned as a writer, she longed to find new literary expressions and wrote many travel articles extolling Florida's beauty. Her pieces reached a broad audience of readers unfamiliar with the state. And exceptional among her writings are her recounting of trips on the Ocklawaha River, a narrow jungle-like waterway. Her experiences highlight the era's booming steamboat travel and offer insights into her early conservationist ethic. Born of her aesthetic appreciation for the state's flora and fauna and recognition of its fragility. Stowe had taken another steamboat trip on the St. Johns River to Lake Monroe and back, but perhaps her most beautiful piece was published in May 1873, entitled Up the Ocklawaha, A Sail into Fairyland. It tells of her 6-day journey on a steamboat on the twisting Ocklawaha River. It was a popular tourist pilgrimage that moved up and down the length of the river with a final stop at Silver Springs, an unfamiliar, astounding sight to most travelers from the north. She wrote that, quote, "It was a spectacle, weird, wondrous, magical, to be remembered as one of the things of a lifetime. Navigating the river was difficult in narrow wooden steamboats that had to negotiate tight turns and avoid fallen trees and overhanging branches. At night, crews lit wood fires atop the pilot house to help light the path. Sometimes fires got out of control, setting boats ablaze. And along the way, the boats made stops at many different landings. There were 87 from Palatka to Silver Springs listed in 1901. There they would blow a whistle to summon the locals, unloading supplies and mail, while stocking up on wood, and food and maybe moonshine, and trying to pass an oncoming steamboat was an exercise in precise maneuvering and sheer luck. At first nervous about the journey, Stowe finally took the Ocklawaha trip and raved about her experiences, reporting, "We have done it. Whether in the body or out, we have been to dreamland, to the land of the fays and the elves, the land where reality ceases and romance begins." She was among 20 passengers who boarded a boat at Palatka, where they were greeted by the crew, assigned cabins, and then provided with a large dinner that she described as ample and delicious. In the middle of the night, she awoke as branches scraped the boat, and she looked out the open windows to see what we were gliding through, and it was palmetto forest and weird grotto, lit up with blazing pine torches. Stowe described the many trees, birds, and alligators encountered along the way, and her peace was frequently disturbed by men shooting wildlife from the boat, the comic sporting action that she abhorred. Like on the St. John's trip, she was annoyed by, quote, "the constant and pertinacious firing kept up by that class of men who think that the chief end of man is to shoot something," noting that she detested the, quote, "indiscriminate and purposeless maiming and killing of happy animals who have but one life to live, for whom the agony of broken bones or torn flesh is a helpless, hopeless pain, unrelieved by any of the resources which enable us to endure." When they arrived in the early morning at Silver Spring, Stowe was delighted. She and others boarded a skiff to float over the crystalline waters, observing aquatic plants and fish, as well as various objects people had thrown into the spring to observe its clarity and depth. By late morning, they reboarded the steamboat and were homeward bound with a sense, quote, that the spell of the illusion was not quite broken. As they traveled, the boat's firemen performed songs with thrilling and grand words, she recalled. And as the boat passed from the shadows of the Ocklawaha to the broad St. John's, 3 cheers made the woods ring, and our camping in the wilderness was over.
Kay and I lived in Mandarin, Florida, about 5 miles from the Stowe residence, for 32 years, more or less, until we moved down here.
So this is the little woman who began this great big war to remind us of the sins we bear, those we're fighting for. Do you seek to know the reasons we set our brothers' blood to flow? Go and ask this little woman why. Harriet would know. Hartford to Cincinnati, up to Maine and back again. Rivers on the St. John's River out in rural Mandarin. Keeping company with strangers, the famous Poole sing, calling Yankees down to Florida by the power of the rain. With her heart and pen, she wrote to lure the Yankees to our land, with a few consequences that she seemed to understand. The creation of her Eden might be bought at precious cost, and in the gain of equal rights, nature's future could be lost. So this is the little woman who began this great big war to remind us of the sins we bear, those we're fighting for. Do you seek to know the reasons we set our brothers' blood to flow? Go and ask this little woman why. Harriet would know. likes to roll the creek, but beloved of the shackle, and those who long to set them free. Others left unsung. Those we've since created show how little we've evolved. So this is the little woman who began this great big war to remind us of the sin today. Those who are fighting for, do you seek to know the reasons we set our brothers' blood to flow? Go and ask that little woman why Harriet would know. Go and ask this little woman why Harriet would know.
In Florida, the love of birds led to the first environmental efforts and continues today. By the late 19th century, a must-have for fashionable women were hats adorned with plumes and bright bird wings, heads, and bodies. As a result, hundreds of thousands of birds died every year to fulfill this fashion demand, and Florida's birds were in the crosshairs. Exotic wading birds such as flamingos, herons, ibis, and roseate spoonbills, some 42 species that inhabited coastal areas, wetlands, and the Everglades, were prime targets. Hunters especially wanted egrets, the showy plumage that appeared on egrets during mating and nesting season. And nesting birds were easy targets because they roosted together in large colonies, sometimes in the hundreds, in small areas called rookeries, and they refused to abandon their nests when hunters arrived. After shooting into the rookeries and removing feathers and skins from adult birds, the hunters left their bodies and crying orphaned chicks and unhatched eggs to decay or become easy meals for crows and any other predators or ants. The desirable feathers and bird parts were shipped to northern millinery markets for processing into large, showy hats. One New York wholesaler was reported to have bought $200,000 worth of plumes for fashions in 1 year, part of the $17 million a year New York millinery industry that employed 20,000 people. This was big business, and it extended to international trade. The results were tragic. Rookeries were wiped out along the Florida West Coast from Tampa all the way to south to the Everglades, leaving unattended eggs and unfed young, 2 generations to die. In the late 1800s, faced with the recognition that America's birds were in trouble, groups formed to save the country's birds. From this arose the Audubon Society, named after the famous avian artist. The group's goals were to, quote, discourage the buying and wearing for ornamental purposes of the feathers of any wild birds, and to further bird protection. It had male and female members and featured strong female leadership, which was unusual for the time. And though Florida was ground zero for much of the plume destruction, it was not until 1900 that the Florida Audubon Society was created by a group of Central Floridians, several of them winter residents from northern states where Audubon activities were vibrant. 9 women and 6 men gathered informally on the afternoon of March 2nd, 1900 in Maitland, Florida to create the organization, which focused on getting state bird protection laws, growing its membership, and educating the public, often following the lead of other groups. But even with new laws intact, Florida's coastline was a wilderness of marshes, mangroves, and remote islands, making law enforcement difficult, if not impossible. In 1902, the National Audubon Society hired Guy Bradley, a former plume hunter, to serve as a game warden in the Everglades. He had a 140-mile stretch of wetland marshes, islands, and rookeries, and he was facing poachers who were willing to ignore state and federal laws for the opportunity to make money in this very hardscrabble area. Florida Audubon raised money to purchase Bradley a boat named the Audubon. Then tragedy struck. On July 8, 1905, Bradley was shot to death after responding to poachers on an island near his home in Flamingo. A man was arrested, but a grand jury refused to indict him. Bradley had become America's first martyr in the Plume Wars, and Florida Audubon would erect a monument to his death. One Florida Audubon leader wrote, "The murder of Warden Guy Bradley fills not only our society in Florida, but the people of the United States with horror. A brave man shot at his post, defending the helpless against brutality, and all for what? The feather, to adorn the head of some woman." 3 years later, a Charlotte Harbor warden also was killed. With these deaths, the Audubon movement gained national attention and growing membership and activities. Much of this help came from women who were blamed for the bird deaths because of female hat fashion, despite the fact that men were the hunters and ran the hat industry. The groups together urged legislation to protect birds, endorsed the creation of bird refuges, and would come to be powerful in the later environmental movement. With a change in fashion, things changed. By 1917, prostitutes were wearing feathers in their hats, leading many women to stop wearing them. And the advent of cars with covered roofs made it hard to wear these hats as well, and the demand for feathers diminished. That, along with the protective laws and the publicity that the Audubon societies created, had made a difference. And the deaths of the birds diminished, but now today they face another challenge, which is loss of habitat.
Well, I guess I need to add a verse to this song about the prostitutes. This is called the Orphan's Waltz. The glades to the strand where the ghost orchids hide. The river runs free, the alligator's south. When the spring hits my night and the egrets come in, there'll be bright white plumes all around. The cities to the north, where the ladies of style wear their hats in the latest high fashion design. The spring hits Tallahassee, and the season begins. There'll be bright white plumes all around, and they waltz round the dance floors, and they waltz round their necks.
selling byways, and they stroll on the boardwalk. When the snow is all gone, they'll be bright, white balloons all around. And they waltz round the dance floors, they waltz round every nest. The hunters with rifles, they shoot all the best. They dance for the orphans, but their eggs never hatch. And they'll be bright, white balloons all around. Some tried to protect them when they hired a ranger, but a man that he knew cut him down like a stranger. They slaughtered the birds, for there was barely a sound. They were bright, white balloons all around. Well, the birds paid the price, but so did Guy Bradley. With fortune and fame, they all wanted it so badly. When the blood of the birds meets the blood of the man, there'll be bright red balloons all around. And they waltz round the dance floors, they waltz round every nest. The hunters with rifles, they shoot all the best. They dance for the orphans, with their eggs never hatch. But they'll be bright, white balloons all around. Yes, they'll be bright, white balloons all around.
So when it comes to saving natural Florida, one name outshines all the others. Marjorie! I'm going to talk about all three of them eventually, but right now I'm going to talk about two of them. It refers to author Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, whose storytelling taught a nation to love the state's rural landscape, and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, a long-lived writer advocate who, though diminutive in size, could instill fear into a room full of developers. Together their work, infused with fervor, intellect, and immense qualities of talent, spanned the 20th century and changed attitudes about Florida's wildlife and landscape. Rawlings and her husband Charles made the adventurous move to Florida from Rochester, New York in 1928 to pursue the literary life. They bought 72 acres in the rural hamlet of Cross Creek that included a white wooden cottage flanked by orange groves with fruit. They hoped, well, they were sure, would cover their income so that they could spend their lives writing. Rawlings explored the people and the landscape, finding inspiration from her writing. And of course, the orange groves did not pay out. But 2 years later, Rawlings sold her first story, which led to novels and the 1939 Pulitzer Prize for fiction for The Yearling, the tale of a young boy, a pet deer, and his family struggled to survive in the sandy scrublands that Rawlings visited. In 1942, she published Cross Creek, a meditation about the hardy folk she now called her friends and the terrain that shaped them. These books were enormously successful and opened the eyes of Americans to the wonders of Florida's nature. Rawlings described bear hunts, fishing trips, backwoods folk, and the stress and beauty of rural living with something akin to what famed 19th century nature essayist Henry David Thoreau realized at Walden Pond. For Rawlings, life at the orange grove at Cross Creek was as close to an idyllic life as is possible on Earth. Her Florida of groves, scrub, and rivers was largely unspoiled paradise. She died in 1953 at age 57, long before problems in Florida's natural systems were apparent. But by the second half of the 20th century, owing to tremendous population growth and development, Florida's environment was in trouble, particularly its vast Everglades. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who had come to Miami in 1915 to work as a journalist for her father at the Miami Herald, fell in love with these wetlands early on. She learned to love the Everglades and the rich flora and fauna found there. Immersed in them, she saw great flocks of birds, amazing flights of 30 to 40,000 in one swoop, and watched eagles soar overhead. But Douglas was realistic about the sawgrass and swarms of bug life, writing, quote, "Let me say right away that knowing the Everglades does not necessarily mean spending long periods of time walking around out there. Unlike other wilderness areas where the naturalist is a hiker, camper, or explorer, the naturalist in the Everglades must usually appreciate it from a distance." Douglas supported creation of Everglades National Park in 1947, and that year she penned a book that used the term River of Grass to help the nation understand and appreciate the Everglades. She went on to a full and successful life, but decades later, at 79, she unexpectedly found herself becoming the system's champion and symbolic leader. No one understood better than Douglas that the Everglades were unique, and now, after decades of federal and state drainage in the southern half of the peninsula, the wetlands were deeply troubled, suffering from periodic droughts, pollution, habitat loss, and endangered species, all the product of poor water quality and distribution. To champion the system and fight wild development schemes, including a jet port in the Everglades that was ultimately stopped, and its remnants are now being used for the detention center dug out of the Gator Alcatraz. I just wrote a column called "What Would Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Do?" I'm pretty sure that would be nice. She founded the Friends of the Everglades, an advocacy group that today continues to fight to protect and restore the wetlands. With her trademark floppy hat and her thick glasses, the petite Douglas would show up at hearings about projects that threaten the Everglades. She may have looked the part of a sweet grandmother, but her soaring elocution and ceaseless grit made her a powerhouse. Those who hoped to capitalize for themselves by destroying or degrading the Everglades bemoaned her presence at public hearings. By the time of her death, 3 decades later, at age 108, Douglas was the state's preeminent environmental activist for all things Everglades. Presidents, governors, and political hopefuls flocked to her side, seeking her hard-to-gain approval. I think of her as the patron saint of the Everglades, whose dogged determination, fearlessness, writing skills, and ability to inspire others offer solid proof today that one person can make a difference.
My parents moved to Florida in 1972. I was a sophomore in college. So that you can hear it. And the first time I came down to visit, they lived in Sarasota. I was, of course, a 19-year-old college kid looking for a good time. And my mother said, you know, we've learned a lot about Florida in the year we've lived here. You need to look beyond the beaches, you need to look beyond the condos, you need to look beyond the bars. And she handed me a book called Cross Creek.
Yeah. Wow.
by Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. I took it home and read it, and it changed my life. It turned me upside down. We lived in Jacksonville when we first moved to Florida, a little over 40 years ago, Kay and me and our daughters. And one of the first places we visited was Cross Creek. It's about an hour and a half drive from where we lived in Mandarin, Florida. And God, I could go on about this forever, but this song was chosen as the best new Florida song in 2000 by the Will McLean Foundation Song Contest folks. I'm now a judge for that most years. And it's been used by the History Channel UK. And I have to say this, that it's made its way around the world. I got an email from a videographer in Australia wanting to know if he could use it as soundtrack for a dog training video. I'm hoping that the dog's name was Marjorie. This is called The Creek.
Sits on her porch and it's warm, chasing the words that spin round in her head. Like the creek can explode without warning. Turn on a phrase that some neighbor has said. Life is the joy between birthing and dying. Crackers, black faces, and white jasmine blues. Living is hard, but we soar in the try. Between the swamp and the scrub mountain, there's plenty of room. Where La Cruz and Orange Lake come closest together, where pictures are painted on words that we speak. Suffer our neighbors, our crops and the weather, but living's like heaven out here at the creek. Marjorie stands where the grass flows like rivers, birds like angels untouched by the sun. She thinks about progress. Thought makes her shiver. How swift will her river of grass need to run? Joy is the life between marshes and mangroves, gators and wildcats and white jasmine blues. Living is hard, whether we're judged in the trying. The cane and the trail, now there isn't much room. Where the straits and the keys come closest together, where pictures are painted on Florida Bay. We suffer the cattle, the roads and the orange groves, the living's like heaven out here in the glades. Beyond Marjorie's window, magnolia still grows and its blossom still placed on the table inside. She looks for her sister, she never did know him, and sail on her river of Christ side by side. Well, I'm Coosa and Orange Lake come closest together, where pictures are painted on words that we speak. We suffer our neighbors, our crops and the weather, with living like heaven out here at the creek. Yeah, living's like heaven out here at the creek. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. Soldiers of the cross.
For a perfect journey, God gave us a perfect day. So wrote noted author and poet Sidney Lanier about his 1800s trip on the Ocklawaha River. Lanier, as enamored with the river as Harriet Beecher Stowe, described it as, quote, the sweetest water lane in the world, a lane which runs for more than 150 miles of pure delight betwixt hedgerows of oaks and cypresses and palms and bays and magnolias and mosses and manifold vine growths. A lane clean to travel alone, for there is never a speck of dust in it save the blue dust and gold dust which the wind blows out of the flags and lilies. A lane which is as if a typical wood stroll had taken shape and as if God had turned the water and trees the recollection of some meditative ramble through the lonely seclusions of his own soul. By the 1960s, however, the Ocklawaha was viewed as a means to an end, part of a massive public works project that would cut a barge canal across North Florida through part of the river's path to shorten dangerous trade routes. The project promised an infusion of federal dollars and new jobs in this rural area and was considered a done deal. The idea of a waterway across the peninsula dated back to the Spanish colonial era, always failing, but this time politicians and business promoters agreed it was going to happen. That is, until Marjorie Harris Carr, a trained scientist, led a group of Florida activists claiming it would irreparably harm the river's environment, which included pristine springs and thousands of acres of forests. It was Florida's first major grassroots environmental crusade and became a national issue. Carr and company armed themselves with facts, the budding science of ecology, and savvy public relations skills, and waged a seemingly hopeless battle, a David versus Goliath fight that they've won thanks to the growing American environmental consciousness. On February 27, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson, along with canal boosters, celebrated the birth of the Cross Florida Barge Canal with the explosion of 150 pounds of dynamite. For Johnson, the project celebrated human dominance. Quote, the challenge of a modern society is to make the resources of nature useful and beneficial to the community. So this is the passkey to economic growth, to sensible and to valid prosperity. To create a value where none existed before is to enlarge the hoard of nature's bounty and to make it serve all our citizens. To Johnson and business and governmental leaders, there was no value in nature unless it was doing humankind's bidding. But pro-canal supporters soon met their match in a grassroots group of academics and nature lovers led by Carr, who loved to quote that Sidney Lanier passage about the beauty of the Ocklawaha, and who believed that a beautiful functioning ecosystem was of inestimable value. She and her group, which came to be called the Florida Defenders of the Environment, at first tried to save the river by convincing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to simply move the path away from the river. When they were ignored and outright disrespected, they waged an all-out battle to stop the entire project. They built a steady PR campaign, gathering facts and expert opinions and regularly contacting news media, which slowly shifted from pro-canal to opposition to the project. They argued that the barge canal wouldn't be economically viable and argued that no one had taken into account the environmental destruction it would cause. And then they filed suit in federal court. The activists made headlines when President Richard M. Nixon, heeding political winds that were blowing in favor of environmental protections, halted the canal in 1971. And here's what he had to say. A national treasure is involved in the case of the barge canal, the Ocklawaha River, a uniquely beautiful semi-tropical stream, one of the very few of its kind in the United States, which would be destroyed by the construction of the canal. That was another president, the next president. It set a national precedent. The project was dead, ensured later by a 1986 congressional deauthorization, but remnants of the canal already under construction remain, including the Kirkpatrick Dam that blocks part of the Ocklawaha, creating a bleak, little-used Rodman Reservoir and impeding river navigation by boaters and by endangered fish and manatees. And this was a path that Rawlings once took that he can no longer complete. Efforts to remove the dam and restore the entire river continue today, led by the Florida Defenders of the Environment. There were hopes this past spring that the Florida legislature would approve a restoration plan for the river, but it wasn't realized. So for now, the dam remains, the reminder of a boondoggle project that changed Florida and the nation forever.
So it was probably 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, I think, that Smithsonian Magazine reported that nationwide we are losing, or were 10 years ago, losing 6,000 acres every day to development, residential, industrial, commercial, infrastructure development. And based on my observations from driving around Central Florida, including Volusia County, I think that today most of that 6,000 acres is happening right here. This is a sing-along. You know, it wouldn't be a folk thing if we didn't bring the folks in and make you sing with us. The chorus of this song, that's called 6,000 Acres, comes around a lot of times. So you'll figure it out, and I want, 87-part harmony. And it's all good whether you can sing or not. Singing is a healthy activity for you. It's wonderful. It drives oxygen to your body. It just makes you feel good. When you go home, go lock yourself in the bathroom and sing it yourself in the mirror, even if it's out of tune. This is 6,000 acres.
Acres for money, 6,000 acres each day. Well, we all stood around while they tore the place down. 6,000 acres a day, not so far. We all came to live here in paradise. built up our highways, houses, drained half the swamps for good measure, displaced actors and bears, oh, but who the hell cares? Your banks full of real estate treasure, 6,000 acres of money, 6,000 acres each day. But we all stood around while they tore the place down, 6,000 acres a day. Do you care for the old Ottawa? Do you dream of free-flowing blades or political phonies and their developer cronies who put billions of birds in their graves? 6,000 acres of money, 6,000 acres each day. But we all stood around while they tore the place down, 6,000 acres a day. Do you care that the rivers run green now? But algae infested the streams, 6,000 acres each day, still owned by a new rate for the physical of money and things. 6,000 acres of money, 6,000 acres each day. Well, we all stood around while they tore the place down, 6,000 acres a day. Someday, in the not distant future, the palm trees and water are gone, and they'll pack up and leave, just like black-hearted bees. We'll all still be singing this song like champions. 6,000 acres of money, 6,000 acres each day. Where we all stood around while they tore the place down, 6,000 acres a day. Well, we all stood around while they tore the place down, 6,000 acres a day. Bravo.
Florida is a land of sunshine, pine forests, beaches, and springs with landscape found nowhere else in the world. But these natural riches which draw many people here are in trouble as unchecked growth, water pollution, and other issues threaten the very essence of our state. Newark with palm trees is how Carl Hyacin has described the development of South Florida. Is that the fate of the entire state, a paved-over paradise? Today, the state is on a precipice, with a small window of time to address these problems and protect valuable resources before sinking into an abyss of urban sprawl, inundated coasts, and disappearing species. There are solutions that require dedication and determination in the face of unprecedented growth that brings more than 1,000 people to the state daily. This demands an extraordinary balancing act to weigh the needs of residents with that of wildlife and ecosystems that have existed for thousands of years. Water is a critical issue. Blessed with an abundance of rivers, mild climate from coastal waters, and underground water supplies known as aquifers that feed our beautiful springs from rain recharge, Florida is a special place. But that hinges on the quantity and quality of the state's water. From saltwater intrusion in wells to algae blooms along the coast and aging septic tanks leaking into rivers and springs, Florida's waters are imperiled. Warning signs are everywhere. Springs with reduced flow and high nutrient levels, manatees dying of starvation after seagrass beds in the Indian River Lagoon died from pollution, and the state ranking first in the nation in number of polluted lakes. At the root is a thirsty, booming population and a desire for green lawns that require sprinkling along with fertilizer and chemicals that drain off in storms, contaminating coastal and underground waters. Another issue is growth management. With increased pressure from a population that has jumped to more than 23 million people, the state must meet the challenge of balancing human needs and that of natural systems. Florida has lost nearly half its wetlands. Longleaf pine forests have largely disappeared. Sandy scrublands that became orange groves are planned now as subdivisions. Shoreline mangroves that support estuaries and act as marine nurseries were removed for waterfront views. Underground aquifers were tapped for drinking water and irrigation. An estimated 100,000 acres of land disappears by the bulldozer annually. As a result, parts of the state have become urban nightmares with clogged roads, overcrowded schools, and deteriorating infrastructure, resembling northern cities that residents are fleeing. One report estimates that if we continue with the status quo by 2070, more than one-third of the state will be developed with demand doubling for water. No other landscape in Florida has been as hated and as loved as the Everglades. Once the target of massive drainage projects, this river of grass that flows southward from Orlando is now valued for its biological diversity and impact on recharging water supplies. Visitors from around the globe head to South Florida to visit the Everglades National Park, which is a World Heritage Site. In 2000, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, the world's largest restoration program, was adopted to counteract those problems at a cost now estimated at more than $20 billion, financed by federal and state dollars. Experts in ecology, engineering, hydrology, and related sciences had their work cut out in trying to figure out how to improve a system now at odds with agriculture and booming development. The Everglades ecosystems also are affected by invasive species and by climate change. Yes, I said that, climate change that is expected to raise coastal seawater levels, bringing salty water into freshwater habitats. At the same time, wetter hurricanes and storms may hit the area. A recent report projected that the Everglades restoration is now at a critical pivot point for potential success. As Everglades activist Joe Podgore wrote, "The Everglades is a test. Pass it and we may get to keep the planet." Maybe that's true of the entire state. It's up to all of us to protect Florida's natural beauty for the generations to come. Please join me.
So we're about done here, kids. So I need to say some thank yous before we do this last song. First, thanks to Leslie Poole for breathing life into this idea that music and literature and Florida history can come together. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I've had a great time with it. It's been very inspiring for me. Thanks to each one of you for being here tonight. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your appreciation. Thanks to this woman here, my wife for 50 years. Without whom none of this stuff would happen for me. Thanks to Jim DeRoche down here for hauling gear, helping me get things moved in, set up, and keeping an eye on the soundboard while we're up here, and just keeping things going. Definitely appreciate it. And thanks for the organizers of this conference. You know, it just, and thanks to Marjorie, for God's sake. For writing the words and creating the inspiration that brings a group of people with this kind of brain power together to keep her memory alive and to keep the work that she started going, and for the trivia. Well, maybe not so much the trivia. Any other one-pointers out there? But thanks to all of you for being here. We appreciate it, and we'll end it with this.
I'm the foundation, I am the sculpted walls, became the natural cistern to hold my water as it falls. I am the one they call Florida, the other call Biscayne. I am the sand, I am the limestone, hold to my precious flame. And then you came with cranes and shovels to dig your straight canals. You pushed your culture southward over concrete roads and rails. And then you changed the course of nature with no thought of consequence. Will you drain me dry for money until the day there's nothing left? Here in my land, springs and flowers, when nature struggles to remain. And though your roads and homes are flooded, never will complain. I will never complain about the Florida rain. I am the swamps, I am the wetlands. You gather in the flow when the rain falls.